What is visceral fat, and why is it so important for us to understand what it is?
So maybe if you're just listening, you're like, God, visceral fat, that sounds awful. I don't think I'm going to listen to this show. Let me tease you and pique your interest and say it's because nothing else will improve your health and improve your lifestyle and the quality of your life more than getting rid of visceral fat. And that's coming from me as a health and performance optimizing physician. I specialize in that, and I'm in the best in the world. So I can follow anything. I can study and look at anything, but that is the one thing that I've centered in on for improving the lifestyle, the life, the health, the body, the appearance, and the performance of human beings, because it has that much a dramatic effect. So visceral fat is what I first learned about back in 2013 by training. I am an emergency medicine physician trained in the U.S. Army. And in fact, I just retired as a full bird colonel from the U.S. Army only about 6 months ago. And I specialize now in this very unique field of health and performance optimization, which other doctors don't even know about. And I wouldn't have even imagined in medical school, because that's not what we do. We don't optimize people's health, and we certainly don't optimize their performance. We treat disease in our profession of medicine. But since my own experience and changing a few things in my life through lifestyle, I realized that that's in fact what happened to me. My health improved, my performance across the board improved, and I began specializing in why that happened. And my research partner, who is Dr. Zheng, introduced me to visceral fat, this collection of dangerous inflammatory fat inside the body, back in 2013. And I've been studying it full time since, researching it full time for the National Science Foundation. We were granted $1.2 million to study it as the single most effective biomarker for eradicating chronic disease. So it's really the burden of disease that keeps you from achieving everything you want. So to your question, visceral fat is this inflammatory, maybe I'll just step aside and show you a picture, this inflammatory fat that's right in the middle of your abdomen. This is kind of where your belly button is. This is your back laying on an MRI scanner with your belly sticking up in the air. And visceral fat is all that white stuff in the middle. And a few key aspects out of it. First of all, you cannot see it outside your body. So other fat and layers of fat on your body is subcutaneous fat. You can see that and kind of even measure it by grabbing hold of it, pinch the inch or pinch 5 inches of it, depending on how much you have. But visceral fat, that is a different animal altogether. That's buried deep inside your body, and you don't know how much you have unless you get scanned. Now, interestingly, I can infer visceral fat from people's faces. So some good news about you, Joe. You got relatively low amounts of visceral fat. But typically as people age, they disease, they get more years, and they accumulate more of that visceral fat, and it causes more disease in their body. And it manifests in your face with an inflamed, kind of a big, swollen, puffy face as you get older. And then you get droopy skin and droopy muscles because literally the influence of visceral fat. And visceral fat's influence comes from what it secretes. It doesn't just sit in there and occupy space. Like we could fill you up with styrofoam and your body wouldn't change. It's the inflammatory molecules that visceral fat secretes because it's an active disease process. It's not benign. People say to me, well, how much visceral fat is a good amount? There's a good amount of disease that you want to tolerate. Visceral fat kills more people than cancer, all cancers combined. So the answer is none. Buckus. You want no visceral fat inside of you because these inflammatory molecules go and cause disease throughout your body. to the females in the audience, it is why you get ugly as you get older. You get filled with visceral fat, and it decreases your appearance. And the same thing with males; it will decrease the appearance of your face. And your face is a very important feature for your life because we're all influencers. So if you're a influencer in social media, or you're a leader in corporate America, or you're a consultant, you're in sales, you're a performer, you have to influence your constituents, your audience, whoever you sell to, whoever you lead. And visceral fat will degrade your appearance of your face and your body and your ability to do that mission. So it's the inflammatory molecules it secretes is why it's so destructive.
Now, there are so many points in there that I would love to pick up on, and I really appreciate the compliment about my face. I really appreciate that. But I would just love to kind of ask you, because obviously we have just seen a landmark moment that, of course, required people to be hugely influential to, of course, cast votes, to win votes in your country. Do you feel as if perhaps that and the appearance of, for instance, the presidential candidates at the highest levels where people are trying to influence people, do you feel as if that, for instance, had an effect?
I really do. In fact, that's very prescient that you would pick up on that because, I've done research on the elections going back to 1962. And the healthiest appearing candidate, without exception, was the one that actually won the election. Nobody talks about that, though. So the healthiest appearing candidate wins. Now, is it because they're a better debater? They're more intelligent? They answer better? Or is it because they're healthier that they do those things? So we don't really know, but the point is you want to be as healthy as possible to be that influencer. So if you look at the candidates back in 2020, Joe Biden and then President Trump, the two of them looked different. Biden edges Trump out for looking healthier. But in 2024, Trump has actually improved his face. He's leaner. He's less inflamed. And Joe Biden is way more inflamed, way more puffier. So I can blow those faces up to make them a little bit bigger, Joe, so you can see it. But Biden's face is a lot more swollen, inflamed. And between the two, which man would you want to be leading your country? It would be the earlier Joe Biden. And between these two, which one would you want to lead the election? It would be the present, President Trump. So if you're interested at all in politics, or you are in politics, you want to become as healthy as you possibly can so that you can be more influential. And here's the biological principle, Joe. What is going on with people that they select somebody to be a president who's healthier, or in reality, they pay more attention to the healthier looking woman or man, is because when you look healthy, optimally healthy, it says to people you appear in front, I live well, and I may be able to help you live well too. So biologically, we are adapted to pay more attention to human beings that we think live better. And our strongest indice of that is their appearance. So you want to be the healthiest man you can possibly be, or the healthiest woman. You want to portray that. Believe me, you will portray how you live and what your level of health is by your face. Now, you can have plastic surgery, you can wear makeup and things like that. That's a kind of what I call an Earl Shy paint job, just a whitewash. But what you really want to do is tell the whole story and be as healthy as possible. And as your face goes, your body goes usually as well too. So I think that's a great question. I think politics in the future, political consultants will be engaging health optimizing physicians to get their candidates as biologically optimized as possible. And C-levels are coming to our medical practice because they can be better leaders, becoming more healthy. And the next phase we're going to also see are investors who invest in companies will be paying to have the leadership of that company optimally healthy because they'll improve their investment by getting key people optimally healthy as well. So it's a fascinating world, health optimization. People don't know too much about it, but it's life-changing. You take somebody from a disease state to a health optimizing state, it completely changes their life and improves their ability to perform.
So in terms of what we're actually looking for here, in terms of, I guess I would perhaps call it fitness cues in terms of the aesthetics of the face. So if I look at the difference between Biden at time 1 against time 2, Trump at time 1 against time 2, I'm seeing, for instance, a puffiness to Biden's face in time 2. Perhaps he looks a little less kind of sharp, a little less present. Trump down the bottom, he looks a little more with it, a little less puffy. Is it that kind of puffiness that kind of we're looking at? Is that one of the things, and what else is there?
Yeah, puffiness and a lack of definition. So maybe what I'll do is show another face that can help with grasping the difference in the appearance of people and how their faces actually improve. So here's I'll step aside here. A better example, because the President Biden and President Trump were clients, but what we do is really optimize them through our clients with 48 strategies. So here's a client that came to work with me. Their face is puffy, they're wrinkled, they have some swelling, some inflammation, and then look what happens to them in 3 months through biological optimization. So 3-month period of time, they now have much better definition, way less swelling, way less inflammation, and they have a vigorous, vital appearance to them that says, I live well and I can lead well. So that is really what is happening is you're getting much better definition, and we can do this in a very short period of time, getting rid of that visceral fat. It's remarkable how much improvement that you can achieve in eliminating that visceral fat. And here's another, even very older gentleman who could barely walk. And now this guy, look how much he improved his appearance in about 4 months. And now he can not only walk great, but he's out chopping wood, back to living the lifestyle that he formerly lived, having eliminated that visceral fat. And perhaps one of the best examples, a really good example, is this former American football player. So this guy is a Super Bowl champion, American football. He's twice to the Super Bowl. His name is Lindsey Knapp. He's a former Green Bay Packer and Kansas City Chief. And he goes from there to this in just 2 years by biologically optimizing himself. And it would be, important to show, what happened on the inside. So this was how he did it, how we do it with clients. This is all the visceral fat that was inside that football player. And then 2 years later, you see it's almost completely gone. He's all dark inside with significant elimination of fat, but not only fat, visceral fat in his abdomen, but his muscles here have become, filled with fat. And then he's eliminated that fat substantially in this other image. And also, this is his heart, where he had this big chunk of fat around his heart. Very inflammatory presence of this dangerous visceral fat around the heart, and how much he reduced that fat around his heart. And then the arteries get encased in this inflammatory fat, and how that got reduced. So across the board, you have this tremendous improvement in the health. And the last picture I'll show with him are his cross sections of his legs. So the explanation for why human beings end up using a cane and end up in a walker and end up in a wheelchair is not because they're old, but because their muscles become inflamed and are replaced with this fat. See this fat growing? And then 2 years later, this footballer has largely eliminated almost all his fat. So the secret to biological optimization and improving your health comes down to getting rid of deadly inflammatory disease promoting, lifestyle impairing, performance reducing inflammatory fat in your body, and then building good healthy tissue in its place, more muscle. And there is a type of fat, since you invited me on, that I'll disclose to your followers. There is a type of fat that actually prevents disease and protects you from it, and actually reduces your rate of death from heart attacks and strokes and cancer, Parkinson's, MS, neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's. Protects you from fatty liver disease and protects you even from obesity. And what's the name of this type of fat? It's called superficial subcutaneous fat. So it's a portion of fat, and maybe I'll, with your permission, if it's okay, can I show you a picture of what it looks like? So for the sake of your audience, might as well, if we're going to bring it up, they'll be like, well, how do we get this magic fat? So this is a cross section of an abdomen. They've got tons of visceral fat. They've got a huge amount of fat in your muscles. You can see that. And so the third type of fat, or another type of fat, is subcutaneous fat. That's fat outside the body. But do you see this black line, Joe, going through? So that's called Scarpa's membrane, Scarpa's fascia. And it's a membrane right in the middle of your subcutaneous compartment. And doctors don't know about this, but if nature's going to put a membrane in the middle of a collection of fat, it's because there's a need to separate those two. They're very different. And the one is called deep subcutaneous fat, goes from that black line to the deep tissues. And deep subcutaneous fat behaves from a biochemical standpoint exactly like visceral fat, muscle fat, and heart fat, fat around the heart. It's inflammatory and it causes disease. But the magic fat you want is superficial subcutaneous fat. All right. It's from the superficial skin to the Scarpa's fascia. Now, when you got a lot of visceral fat, muscle fat, deep subcutaneous fat, and a lot of heart fat, you're going to have just a little bit of that stuff. And so you want to flip it around and be predominantly superficial subcutaneous fat. So people that think they want to have a six-pack are devoid of having superficial subcutaneous fat. You want to have a six-pack, only you don't want the world to know about it, okay? You want it concealed with a thin layer of fat, reducing the definition, which is completely contrary to what the bodybuilder industry tells you. But women especially, these women get liposuction, they get the abdomen sucked out, and then they write me how it was the worst thing they did because they got a lot more colds and illnesses and health problems when they got rid of that protective fat, and it made their faces less attractive. And so just over the weekend, a couple of days ago, I had two women come up to me and were asking me to evaluate their superficial subcutaneous fat look in their abdomens. And they had ripped six packs, okay? Like some kind of a guy, six pack. And I looked up at their faces and they had dude faces like men. And that's what happens. So women, you want to have that layer of fat on you to make your face look healthy and effeminate and pretty. And males, you want to have that on your face so you don't have that superficial subcutaneous fat on your abdomen so you don't have that well. But the big reason is not to go through life being attractive. The big reason is go through life with less disease. And I'm going to tilt down, and Dr. Sean going to show off his belly. I have a six pack, but you need my MRI to see it. I have a layer of superficial subcutaneous fat coating my skin, protecting my abdomen. And so I walk the walk and not just do the talk. I optimize my own fat because of that protective nature that superficial subcutaneous fat has. So you want a six pack. You want it only visible on an MRI scan. You want a nice, relatively thin layer of fat. You can feel my six pack, but I've got that nice protective fat. And the reason why it's protective is, one, it doesn't produce inflammatory molecules causing disease. And it produces a type of molecule that your audience will benefit from, and I'll share it with them, called adiponectin, adiponectin. And they're going to want to write that down and jump in ChatGPT and Google and search and read about adiponectin, hopefully fall in love with it. And you want to promote more adiponectin because of its protective nature against heart attacks, strokes, cancer, dementia, memory impairment, and all the other maladies and disease I talked about before. So it's really, really a great body of fat, collection of fat that almost nobody knows about. But as this science is emerging, hopefully your audience will take it to heart and start trying to get protective superficial subcutaneous fat on their body and get rid of these other inflammatory fats inside their body.
I love it. And there's so much in there that I want to, and so much in you that I want to dive into with you. But if I could just clarify just one thing. So we know that, for instance, as you mentioned, that it's possible that how much visceral fat that, for instance, the presidential candidates, that if you're the CEO of a company, if you are a lawyer or a doctor trying to influence another person, that the appearance of one's face giving off those survival cues, that it likely has an ability to influence others. I'm curious, if that in men, that chiseled jaw, the appearance of definition is really important in doing that. Is it the same in women, or what are we looking for there in terms of optimal fitness cues, for instance, within a woman's face?
Yeah, so it definitely is the case for both men and women. For men, interesting, one of my most recent clients this year is one of the attorneys for President Trump. So very, very high-end, high-performing attorney, and who's completely, optimized his life in the past 6 months. He's dropped a huge amount of weight. He's had to spend $25,000 to have his 50 suits altered because he's lost so much weight. And he's putting on muscle and shrinking his fat. And he's a trial attorney. So why this is good is because he's got to stand in front of a jury and he's got to persuade them on critical points, facts and determinations. We call them fact finders, the juries. I'm an attorney myself. And he's also got to think very quickly when he's cross-examining people and pick up on important things from witnesses, to draw conclusions from. And so you want to think fast, you want to perform well. And you want to be, you don't want to be unhealthy looking in front of a jury and trying to persuade them, or a judge or somebody you're selling to, or whoever you're leading, whether you're a man or a woman, across the board. But here's an interesting thing, actually, Joe, because I know soccer is popular, football, I guess you caught there in UK. Here's an interesting thing. I've never shared this on a podcast, but, I look at all the professional athletes and professional teams, and in my opinion, the one sport that has the healthiest appearing faces is soccer players. They're very lean, very low inflammation because they're doing a lot of sprinting. Okay. A lot of sprinting. They're high performers. And they, particularly when they get to the top, like Chelsea or, they're playing in Europe instead of our little, we're getting better here in America with the sport, but they're very healthy appearing when they get to that professional level in the UK and Europe. But here's the interesting thing. This blew my mind when I saw this. See if you agree with this. I wanted to look and see if there was a difference in the position. So in my opinion, those midfielders and people in more forward positions are doing more sprinting than the defensive people. So I wanted to see if there's a difference. So I'm looking at all the soccer players when they get in a team photograph. And I'm looking at their faces and trying to get their names to look to their sport. And do you know what almost invariably what I found? Who was the healthiest member on that team position-wise? The goalie. The one who almost never sprints. But here's the interesting thing. Why is the goalie the healthiest player if he's or she is not sprinting? Here's the reason. They react so fast that the healthiest person on that team ends up going into the goalie position. So when you start in your earlier years and you're figuring out your positions, the coach realizes this guy or this girl stops the ball way better than everybody else. So by virtue of the position selects the healthiest person in that team, and they end up being goalies. So the goalie reacts way faster than other people. And because of their ability to react so fast, they're also the healthiest people on that team. It's very interesting. So their faces just look profoundly healthy to this health optimizing physician. So I was very surprised. Candidly, I was upset. And then even before I figured this out, my oldest boy's best friend was a soccer player. Okay. And he looked very healthy, and he came over to my house. So I'm talking to him, and he told me that he plays what position he plays is goalie, and that my twin or my son, and he let me know that this guy is the fastest on the team. And I'm like, God, it doesn't make sense that he could be the fastest sprinter on the team and he's a goalie. But it makes sense from the standpoint he's the healthiest person on the team. So of course he's going to be a faster sprinter. He's going to react faster. So that's what's going on now. If you're an investor in professional soccer, you want to health optimize your team to get them all reacting faster and all sprinting faster. And, they play around with it, but, the body of knowledge that even professional, as advanced as it is, in terms of science, doesn't really touch the research realm that's within a health optimizing position. If I had any contacts in professional soccer, I would love to help a team become superhumans beyond what they achieve with their trainers and everything they try to do on their own.
My experience, and I have to say I played football to a very low level growing up, used to be that you would chuck the worst player on the team when I was in high school in the goal, the person that nobody wanted. But at a professional level, perhaps there is something there. And this has actually brought me on to another point that I'm really interested in, is because one of the things that I'm thinking about is that when it comes to the body, and I'm curious, is it possible for us to be, for instance, thin on the outside, for people to look and go, wow, this person has, by appearance, by sight, no fat on them. Yet, conversely, they can be flabby, they can be puffy. My friends, they would call it skinny fat or scubby. I'm curious how this can potentially happen. They can have no definition, but yet they appear small to the eye, to the untrained
Yeah.
eye.
So it is very common, and perhaps I'll take you back to this um, this image right here. This shows an excellent example of somebody that is TOFI. Whoops, let me bring that up a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. So in this scan here, there
Sorry, when you say tofu, what do you mean by tofu?
TOFI is they're thin outside, but mostly fat inside. So the majority of the fat that they are burdened by, that they have in their body, is actually on the inside than on the outside. The concern with TOFIs are they actually have a higher level of mortality than somebody who's obese, who's really patently, obviously fat. So TOFIs are these thin people that carry this high proportion of very inflammatory fat and also less of that protective fat. And so they just die earlier and have more disease than people, and they have more inflamed faces than people. Like, think about this, Joe. The average kind of just fat guy oftentimes has kind of a smooth, kind of a baby face, you know. Yeah, it might be big, but the TOFI has this harsh, inflamed face. And example I'll show you, because he was a TOFI, is well, I just went right by a TOFI and I'll pull it up. This guy right here, this guy was a TOFI. Do you see his inflamed face? Not very attractive. But in 3 months, look how much he improved his face by eliminating his visceral fat. So that deep belly fat is so inflammatory that it really, and look at the giant space in his eyelids, okay? And then how that was reduced, his level of oxygen saturation of his lips improved. Everything about his face, was improved by eliminating that inflammatory fat inside him. So these TOFIs bear the appearance of that inflammatory fat on their faces. And this guy here was a TOFI as well. And then as he eliminated his visceral fat, greatly improved your face. So being mostly burdened by fat on the inside of your body is a huge disadvantage to you biologically. It not only causes more disease burden, but it impairs your performance. So you don't think as quickly, you don't respond as quickly, your reflexes are poor, your ability to play sports, your ability just to lead other people, lead a company, lead your customer or client who's you're trying to get to buy from you is impaired. So I have quite a few professional sales executives who come to me and blow it up once they improve their appearance of their face. They tell me this happens to them on LinkedIn, which is this, professional kind of social media website that a lot of businesses done. Once they improve the appearance of their face, they book way more meetings with people. So people look at the appearance of your photograph, and everybody else in LinkedIn is using their younger photographs. But my clients use their latest photographs because they look way better than they did when they were younger. And so, in LinkedIn, my own twin brother had this happen to him. He's a professional sales account executive, and I optimized his health. And 2 years later, he made the most money he did in his entire career the last 2 years from the increased sales, and he retired. And there's his physician twin brother still working. But I love what I do, and I probably will never retire because there's such a need to be able to do that. But you definitely want to be improving your appearance. And here's a shocking one. Let me just share this with you because this is very cool. Here are two other males. Okay, these are two guys. So we'll show you their face, and just imagine what their faces are going to look like. Okay, so it's a lot of visceral fat. Now I'm going to show you their face so you can see what their faces look like. They're kids. So visceral fat starts when you're a child and it causes inflammation. Now, you may not see that right away. This is a 10-year-old. This is his 8-year-old brother. But watch what happens. These are clients whose parents, the parents gave me permission to show their kids because of what happened. Look at the change in their faces in these young boys as they eliminate visceral fat. From here to here, their lips got bigger, their lips got more red, and both of them, and way better complexion, way nicer looking faces. This is how kids should look, but most kids today look like this only because nobody knows about the destructive, inflammatory influence that this deadly fat is causing people inside.
So I feel as if we've teed this up so nicely. We've learned about how visceral fat is related to disease. We've learned about how important it is in influencing others. Now, of course, we've learned that, you can be, tofu, you can be skinny fat, as my friends would say, and that might even put you at more of a mortality risk than, for instance, if you were obese. So now, I guess people listening to this, they're probably going to be jumping through their screens or just about to, push their earphones in through their ears. How do we go about shredding visceral fat?
We studied this for 7 years for the National Science Foundation, and I've studied it ever since. And here's what we learned. We worked with the U.S. military. We worked with law enforcement in the United States, local, county, and state troopers, state police, and firefighters. And what we found is when you tell them what to do, they don't do it. Even when they want to, they don't do it. But you know what makes a difference? What people seem to need to be able to do is see the disease inside of them. It's this imaginary boogeyman that you're supposed to be doing these things to stop, that you don't even know whether he or she is really inside of you. But when you get an MRI, Joe, it ends the lie. You're not as healthy as you think. And when humans see all that disease inside of them, then they get very motivated and they became far more successful at eliminating visceral fat. So if your audience is listening today and they're grabbing their headphones and they're like, good Lord, I got to get rid of this stuff, then to start, I would get an MRI and see the amount of disease that you have inside of your abdomen, all that inflammatory fat collecting around your heart, and all the fat in your muscle. And a lot of people don't realize that fat around the heart is really present, and you can even see it now. Unfortunately, we're able to show it in autopsies. So I'll just show you a picture of that inflammatory fat that encases a heart so you can see it. That's what it looks like. It surrounds the heart, this inflammatory collection of fat, and it literally causes the arteries to become diseased and clogged. And so the very best thing is if you had surgery, like when you're having surgery and the surgeon would take a video and say, man, do you suck inside? The next best thing is to be able to show that fat around your heart on an MRI. That's a guy who's 73 years old, managing director of Price Waterhouse Cooper, and then he reduces his heart fat, this much, and let me bring it down a little bit, in just 3 months, significant reduction in that heart fat because he saw it. You got to see the boogeyman in real life, and then you become really terrified instead of just hearing about the boogeyman. So get an MRI wherever you're at, and if you can't get an MRI, because maybe you have a defibrillator or you have a cochlear implant or some other surgical implant that's impairing your ability to be scanned because you can't go into a magnetic field because MRIs use safe magnetic fields instead of radiation. Then you can get a CT. So the CT scans. Oftentimes, women get CT scans of their abdomen, and you can see visceral fat in a CT scan. So it's not something that's unique and only visible by MRI. So many women have had CT scans, and you can get. I thought I had a CT scan in here, but unfortunately, I don't. Oh yeah, I do. Here it is. So CT scans are just the opposite. Visceral fat shows up as black instead of white, and muscle shows up as white. So here's a CT scan, and you can see all that black and all that visceral fat inside. So to answer your question, get a scan. If you've ever had an existing scan, we can read it too.
So point one, let's get an MRI scan. Let's see the boogeyman. Hopefully there's nothing there, but I imagine that there's a good chance that it is. So unfortunately, it's come back now. We've got a lot of visceral fat. What do we do then? What are we attacking? How are we doing it?
Yeah. So the big things, the first and most important thing that you want to do is cut out processed foods. So the best example of that is a very interesting series of scans that we did in this 68-year-old guy who was filled with visceral fat, filled with fat in his muscle. And then in just 2 weeks, Joe, you can see his visceral fat is reduced. And after 35 weeks, it's substantially reduced. And he goes from having a dad bod to having an abdomen like a 20-year-old collegiate athlete. He's got a six-pack, on his MRI. His muscles are free of that fat. His visceral fat is significantly reduced. His shape is and he's 68 years old. And he only did one thing. And this is what I always tell people on podcasts. And for sure, I have my clients doing this, is to cut out processed foods, reduce carbohydrates, especially processed carbohydrates, but cutting out all processed foods. That's the only thing this guy did was he cut out processed foods. He did not exercise 1 minute. Not 1 minute. So key to getting rid of processed foods is to start eating correctly, or to eliminate visceral fat is to cut out processed foods and start eating correctly. So eating clean, and the best diet I recommend is what I call the living carnivore diet. And what that is eating meat with living probiotic fermented foods. So like fermented kimchi, fermented sauerkraut, fermented yogurt, fermented kefir, fermented kvass, fermented beets. Fermented foods have microbes in them that actually go down and colonize your gastrointestinal tract and help you absorb more nutrients and protect you from toxins. So it's another great big secret that most people don't know about is the value of eating probiotic fermented foods. And it's in most traditional people, Joe, they have a practice or a tradition of eating fermented foods. And it's a practice, it's a tradition because of the health benefits that are derived from it. So cut out processed foods, eat fermented foods, and then the type of exercise you want to do is not durational exercise. You don't want to jog. You don't want to be a distance runner. So this guy is a distance runner, is a marathoner. He did 10 to 12 marathons a year. He was only 34. He had this big chunk of fat around his heart. And we see this in a lot of distance runners.
Which is a paradox, right?
Yeah, it's you think that you don't have any fat. They're trophies. I mean, the reality is this guy, you don't see any fat on the outside. He's got like nothing. He was like super skinny. That's the way marathoners look like. But he's a trophy. He's fat inside, but thin outside. And here's another example of another runner filled with visceral fat inside. And look how different he looked in 2 months, because we got him to stop running and just jogging, no more running or jogging, and to only sprint. So what you want to do is do what is more primal, what is more ancestral. We didn't go out and jog. We didn't have lifestyles like that. We busted ass in a sprint to save our lives, or to save the lives of our children, or, our fellow Klansmen. So we sprinted, and sprinting eliminates visceral fat in a very short period of time. So there's that. And we have there's so many things, don't even have time to get into it, and we got to leave some stuff for people to work with us. But we have 48 things that we specialize in, and we figured out over these, over a decade now, specializing in visceral fat, how to get rid of it. And there's, over 48 specific strategies. But those are the big ones that I will share with your audience, just because they're awesome enough to follow you and your great content. I want to share those really critically important things that they can get started on. But the discerning man or woman is going to pay attention to a health optimizing physician when he says thousands of these people would not eliminate visceral fat until they saw the fat inside of them. It's life-changing. So spend the money. It's, they're about anywhere from $100 in some spots in the US to maybe on average around $300 or $400 to get an MRI, and well worth the money.
In one of your tweets, you said, fasting lets you take out the trash. A prolonged 72-hour fast purges dead and diseased cells, tissues, tumors, inflammation. Stop eating every day and let your body go into repair mode. I'm curious, would that also be an effective strategy? I'm not saying necessarily 72 hours, but would also maybe 72 hours you would also recommend. I'm curious there. But is fasting also something that you would recommend to bring down that level of visceral fat?
Absolutely. And here's the interesting thing. Not only does it burn visceral fat, but here's the very interesting thing. When we incorporated extended fasting into our practice, for our client patients that work with us to become literally the healthiest people in the world, what we found was superficial, protective, beneficial, super subcutaneous fat was preserved and even increased with fasting. How about that? How about that, ladies and gentlemen? You fast and you actually increase a type of fat in your body when you fast. But it's not any fat. It's magical fat that protects you from disease. And so this is what our ancestors did. Now, they didn't go out and say, well, okay, clan folk, it's time for us to do a fast for 7 days. No. Mother Nature said, you're not going to be successful on the hunt this week or the next month, and you're not going to get any food. So extended fasting really is a consequence to life. And so our ancestors would have been deprived the ability to be successful on hunts. They would have put on superficial subcutaneous fat, which is a better source of energy, protects you from disease, and protects you from that visceral fat. So extended fasting, Joe, great question. You got another golden nugget out for your audience.
I'm sure there'll be many people listening today that will also be wondering, we've talked so much, for instance, about lifestyle interventions, whether that's sprinting, whether that's the quality of the calories that we're consuming, cutting out those carbohydrates. Would there be, for instance, I'm sure there'll be people out there listening now, and they do want a quick fix. They want, for instance, a supplement that they can take. Are there any that you recommend at all?
One of them is lithium orotate. Lithium orotate. It's not the drug, it's a mineral. So before you dismiss this, oh my God, I'm not taking lithium, because there's what jumps in people's head. It's a drug for crazy people. Lithium is a mineral that's naturally present in drinking water, and where it's higher in content, there's less depression, anxiety, less dementia, less Alzheimer's, and greater health, less incidence of crime, less incidence of suicidality, higher performing humans. So lithium is just a mineral. You can buy it off Amazon, lithium orotate, and you can read about it in a great article called Lithium, the Misunderstood Mineral. Lithium, the Misunderstood Mineral by Dr. Jonathan Wright, a Harvard physician, writes a great article, part 1, part 2. Read it online. It's absolutely free. And you'll love that article, and you'll start ordering lithium orotate online, and it does absolute wonders. My second favorite supplement is NAC, N-acetylcysteine, NAC, N as in Nancy. So NAC is one of the reasons why I love it so much is I had a lot of experience using it as in the ER physician. I won't go into why we did it, but we would for emergencies. But it's anti-inflammatory, and proof of why it's so good is big pharma. The big pharmaceutical companies went to the FDA and tried to get it banned because it's so anti-inflammatory. It started to interfere with their money. Okay. So NAC is one of those supplements I recommend my clients. And interestingly, it's the only supplement that comes to mind that diminishes and helps to eliminate visceral fat. So NAC is a great one to take.
Tell these guys where they can connect with you and anything else that you would love our audience to check out.
Yeah. So the best way to connect with me is just through my website, which is my name, DrSeanomara.com. So DrSeanOmara.com. And I'm also, if you're interested in following me on social media, I'm at DrSeanomara for Instagram, for Twitter, X, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, Threads, and probably other social media that I'll find out about in the future. But I'm trying to keep that same name going. But you can go to my website, learn more about what I do and my medical practice, and potentially working with my medical practice either online, or the very best thing is if you want to become a biological badass and be the best biological version of yourself. I can't take care of the whole world. I'm selective. But if you got a motivating story and you're motivated, I'm looking for influencers to spread this around. Come work with us directly in my medical practice one-on-one.
I love it. This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. Great questions. And I wish you all the best. Happy to come back again anytime.